Hello, dear friends. Nice to meet you again. Today, I bring you another meaningful story that I am sure you will enjoy. Listen to me, prepare yourself a cup of tea and a comfortable sofa to start exploring the story right now. Let's go. Today's story is about a young handyman married a 75-year-old millionaire widow, expecting an easy life of luxury. But just 3 days later, he was stunned by what he discovered. The ornate gates creaked open as Ethan's work truck rolled up the long, winding driveway leading to Eleanor's estate. The view was breathtaking. Meticulously maintained gardens stretched endlessly, their vibrant flowers filling the air with a sweet fragrance. The mansion itself, a towering stone marvel with arched windows and intricate designs, looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. Ethan parked his truck and stepped out. His toolbox in hand, his scruffy jeans and worn boots felt completely out of place against the elegance surrounding him. Taking a deep breath, he pushed down the feeling of intimidation. This wasn't his first time working in a wealthy area, but this home was on another level. He rang the doorbell, and the large oak door opened almost immediately. Standing there was Eleanor, a petite woman with perfectly styled silver hair. She wore a tailored blouse and trousers, her posture straight, her presence commanding despite her age. "You must be the handyman," Eleanor said, her voice poised and calm. "Yes, ma'am," Ethan replied with a polite nod. "I'm Ethan, here to fix the leak in the upstairs bathroom." Eleanor gestured for him to come in. "Follow me." Ethan stepped into the marble-floored foyer, glancing at the grand staircase, the crystal chandelier glittering above, and the gallery of priceless artwork along the walls. "You have a beautiful home," he said, attempting small talk. Eleanor looked back with a faint smile. "Thank you. It's been my refuge for many years." She led him to an expansive bathroom with gleaming fixtures and a luxurious tub large enough to fit a family. Ethan set down his toolbox and got to work, the sound of clinking tools filling the elegant space. Eleanor stood nearby, observing him with a curious expression. "So, Ethan," she began, her tone conversational, "how long have you been in this trade?" "About 5 years," Ethan replied without looking up. "It's honest work, but I'd like to start my own business someday. Aiming higher, you know?" Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "Ambition is admirable, but it can be a double-edged sword if it blinds you to the more important things in life." Ethan paused, glancing up at her. "I don't see how working toward a better life could ever be a bad thing." Eleanor studied him with a sharp, knowing gaze. "You believe money is the answer to a better life, don't you?" "Of course," Ethan said, leaning back slightly. "Look at this house, your life. If I had this kind of money, I'd never have to worry about anything again." Eleanor's smile grew, though there was a trace of something deeper, perhaps wisdom or amusement. "You think this house means I have no worries, doesn't it?" Ethan asked, his tone defensive. Eleanor stepped closer, her eyes piercing. "Money solves problems, Ethan, but it doesn't heal people. It doesn't bring lasting happiness or fulfillment." Ethan frowned, unsure how to respond. "Maybe not, but it makes life a whole lot easier." "For a while," Eleanor said gently, "but the things that truly matter, love, purpose, connection, money can't buy those. Chase wealth too blindly, and you might find yourself emptier than when you began." Ethan let out a short laugh. "Easy for you to say. You've already made it. You can't know what it's like to struggle." Eleanor's expression softened, her voice steady. "Don't be so sure." A thoughtful silence filled the space before Ethan broke it, focusing back on the pipes. When he finished, he stood and wiped his hands. "The leak's fixed." "Good," Eleanor replied, escorting him to the door. "Thank you for your work, Ethan. You've given me a lot to think about." Ethan raised an eyebrow, confused. "Me? I'm just a handyman." Eleanor smiled warmly. "Everyone has something to teach, whether they realize it or not. As Ethan stepped out, the heavy door closed behind him, but something about Eleanor's words lingered. He couldn't shake the feeling that their paths would cross again. Just a week later, Ethan received a surprising call from Eleanor's assistant, inviting him back for a meeting. Curiosity and the allure of stepping back into her opulent world got the better of him. "Sure," Ethan said, trying to keep his tone casual. "I'll be there." When he arrived, the gates opened as smoothly as before, and the same sense of awe crept in as he drove down the long driveway. Eleanor greeted him at the door, her demeanor as composed as ever. "Ethan," she said warmly, stepping aside to let him in, "thank you for coming on such short notice." "Of course," he replied, his hands empty this time. "What can I help you with?" Eleanor led him to an elegantly furnished sitting room adorned with tasteful decor and framed photographs of what Ethan assumed were family members. She gestured for him to take a seat and settled into a chair opposite him. "I'll get straight to the point," she began, her voice calm but resolute. "I've been thinking a lot since our last conversation." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "About what?" "About you," Eleanor replied, her sharp eyes scanning his face. "And about a proposition that could benefit us both." "A proposition?" Ethan repeated, his confusion evident. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "Ethan, I've spent my life building wealth, influence, and a certain reputation. But none of that changes the fact that I'm alone. My late husband passed years ago, and while I have acquaintances, I lack someone I can truly trust." Ethan nodded slowly, unsure of where this was heading. "I'm not looking for love or romance," Eleanor continued. "What I need is a partner, someone who can be by my side, help me manage the complexities of my life, and ensure I'm not taken advantage of as I grow older." Ethan frowned, leaning forward. "I'm still not following." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Let me put it plainly. I want you to marry me." The words hung in the air like an unexpected thunderclap. Ethan blinked, convinced he had misheard. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "I want you to marry me, not out of love, but practicality. In exchange, I'll ensure you're financially secure for the rest of your life." Ethan stared at her, his mind racing. "You're serious?" "Completely," Eleanor replied without hesitation. "Why me?" Ethan asked, still trying to grasp what she was saying. "Surely you could find someone more suitable?" Eleanor chuckled lightly. "Because you're honest, perhaps even too honest. You're not polished or pretentious, and I believe that makes you trustworthy. Plus, I see potential in you, Ethan. You have ambition, but you lack direction. I can help with that." Ethan leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "This is a lot to process." "I imagine it is," Eleanor said, her tone softening. "Take the night to think it over. Come back tomorrow with your answer." That night, Ethan lay awake in his small, cramped apartment, staring at the ceiling. Eleanor's proposal echoed in his mind. On one hand, it seemed absurd. Marry a woman 50 years his senior. On the other hand, it was an opportunity unlike any he'd ever imagined. He thought about his current life. Endless days of hard labor, barely making rent, and dreaming of something better. Eleanor's wealth could change everything. "It's not like she's asking for love," he muttered to himself. "It's a business deal." By morning, his ambition had won out. When Ethan returned to the mansion, Eleanor was waiting for him in the same sitting room, her expression calm but expectant. "Well?" she asked as he took a seat. Ethan met her gaze and took a deep breath. "I'll do it." Eleanor's lips curled into a small, satisfied smile. "You've made a wise decision, Ethan. I believe this arrangement will benefit us both." Though he smiled back, Ethan couldn't ignore the voice in his head reminding him that his choice wasn't about Eleanor. It was about the promise of wealth and security. The wedding day arrived with minimal fanfare, just as Eleanor had requested. The ceremony was held in the grand living room, attended by a handful of Eleanor's closest acquaintances and Ethan's bewildered friends. Standing at the front of the room in a borrowed suit, Ethan nervously adjusted his collar. The surreal nature of the moment wasn't lost on him. Just days ago, he was fixing pipes in this very house, and now he was marrying its owner. Eleanor entered the room gracefully, her silver hair styled to perfection, her tailored dress exuding timeless elegance. She wasn't a blushing bride, but her poise made it clear she knew exactly what she wanted and wasn't afraid to claim it. As the officiant began the ceremony, Ethan couldn't ignore the mixture of unease and anticipation swirling within him. As they exchanged vows, Eleanor's words were direct and practical, devoid of flowery sentiment but filled with sincerity. "I promise to be your partner in this journey, to honor the terms of our agreement, and to ensure we both benefit from this union." Ethan hesitated for a moment before repeating his own vows. The practicality of it all weighed on his mind. Yet, as he slid the ring onto Eleanor's finger and she did the same for him, he felt the gravity of the moment. This wasn't just a deal. It was the start of something he couldn't quite define. After the ceremony, Eleanor hosted a modest reception in the mansion's dining hall. The atmosphere was subdued, filled with polite conversations and the occasional clink of champagne glasses. Ethan's friends, dressed in their best, still appeared out of place among the wealthy guests. "You actually went through with it," one of his friends whispered, nudging him. "I mean, look at this place. You're set for life." Ethan forced a smile, but the words left an odd taste in his mouth. That evening, Ethan moved into the mansion, carrying only a few bags of clothes and personal belongings. Eleanor had already prepared a room for him, separate from her own. "This will be your space," she explained, showing him the large, well-appointed guest room. "Feel free to make yourself comfortable, but I expect you to respect my routines and preferences." "Of course," Ethan replied, though he felt a flicker of unease. Over the next few days, Ethan began to settle into his new life, though it was far from what he had imagined. The mansion was quiet, almost eerily so, and Eleanor mostly kept to herself. Gradually, their paths began to cross more frequently. Eleanor started inviting him to breakfast in the sunlit dining room, where they exchanged polite conversation over coffee and toast. In the evenings, they occasionally shared the library, Eleanor reading a book while Ethan aimlessly scrolled on his phone. At first, Ethan found her aloof demeanor intimidating, but he soon discovered a sharp wit and dry humor that caught him off guard. Eleanor spoke with the confidence of someone who had weathered life's storms, and her stories often left him captivated. One evening, after dinner, Ethan found Eleanor in the sitting room, gazing at an old photograph on the mantel. "Is that your husband?" he asked, gesturing to the picture. Eleanor nodded, her expression softening. "Yes, Charles. He was a good man, though we didn't always see eye to eye." "What happened to him?" Ethan asked cautiously. "He passed away nearly 10 years ago," Eleanor replied, her voice steady. "It was sudden, a heart attack." "I'm sorry," Ethan said, unsure of what else to say. Eleanor turned to him with a faint smile. "Don't be. Life moves on, and so must we." She gestured for him to sit, and for the first time, Ethan glimpsed a different side of her, a vulnerability wrapped in strength. "I wasn't always wealthy, you know," she began. "I grew up in a small town in a family that barely scraped by. My father worked in a factory, and my mother cleaned houses. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college." Ethan blinked in surprise. "You've never mentioned that before." "Most people don't ask," Eleanor said with a chuckle. "They see the house, the money, and assume it's always been this way." She leaned back in her chair, her gaze distant. "Charles and I built everything from scratch. He had the vision, and I had the grit to make it happen. But it wasn't easy. We lost everything more than once before we succeeded. Ethan stared at her, feeling a pang of shame. He had assumed her wealth was inherited, a result of privilege. Hearing her story, he felt guilty, not just for judging her, but for the reasons he had agreed to the marriage. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked quietly. Eleanor met his gaze, her expression calm but piercing. "Because I want you to understand that wealth means nothing if you lose yourself along the way. I've seen too many people chase money and end up with nothing of real value." Ethan looked away, her words cutting deeper than he expected. He had married her for the money. There was no denying it. But now, sitting here, hearing her story, he felt a tug of guilt and something else he couldn't quite name. Eleanor placed a hand on his arm, her touch light but firm. "Ethan, life has a way of teaching us what truly matters. I hope, for your sake, you learn that lesson sooner rather than later." As she stood and left the room, Ethan remained seated, her words echoing in his mind. For the first time since agreeing to this arrangement, he began to question not just his motives, but himself. 3 days after the quiet, understated wedding, Ethan found himself adjusting to the surreal luxury of the mansion. Yet, he couldn't shake a lingering sense of unease. The practical nature of the marriage gnawed at him, though he reassured himself it was worth it for the future Eleanor had promised. Late one afternoon, curiosity got the better of Ethan. He wandered into Eleanor's study, a room she had explicitly said was off-limits unless invited. She was at a board meeting for one of her charities, and the house was unusually quiet. The study was as grand as the rest of the mansion, with towering bookshelves, a mahogany desk, and sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Ethan's gaze wandered around the study before landing on a neatly arranged stack of papers on the mahogany desk. He hesitated, glancing back toward the door, but curiosity won out. Stepping closer, his eyes caught bold lettering on the topmost document, "Testament of Eleanor Kingsley." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He knew he shouldn't, but his hands moved before he could stop himself. Flipping through the pages, he scanned the text, each line feeling like a blow. Eleanor intended to donate her entire estate to charity. Every penny, every asset, even the mansion. There was no mention of him anywhere. His breath quickened as the paper slipped from his fingers. The room seemed to close in on him, his mind spinning with disbelief. "She lied to me," he muttered under his breath. Stumbling out of the study, Ethan paced the hallway, anger and betrayal boiling within him. He had entered this marriage believing it would finally free him from the struggles of his old life. Now, it seemed Eleanor had outmaneuvered him completely. That evening, Eleanor returned home with her usual composed demeanor, greeting Ethan and asking about his day as they sat for dinner. Ethan could barely meet her gaze, his appetite gone. "Is everything all right?" Eleanor asked, her sharp eyes studying him carefully. "Yeah," Ethan replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just tired." Eleanor nodded, not pressing further, but Ethan could feel her quiet suspicion. In the following days, Ethan's demeanor shifted noticeably. He grew distant, avoided conversations, and found excuses to leave the house. Eleanor noticed, of course. Observant as ever, she chose not to confront him immediately, giving him space instead. One afternoon, as they sat in the sunroom, Eleanor set her teacup down and folded her hands in her lap. "Ethan," she began, her tone calm but firm, "is there something on your mind?" Ethan stiffened, his gaze fixed on the floor. "No, everything's fine." "Are you sure?" she pressed gently. "You've seemed preoccupied lately." "I'm fine," he said abruptly, standing and heading toward the door. "I just need some air." Eleanor watched him leave, her expression unreadable. That evening, Ethan sat alone in his room, the moment he found the will replaying in his mind. Anger burned in his chest as he muttered to himself, "She used me. She knew I agreed to this for the money, and she never said a word." But beneath the anger, a flicker of shame began to take root. Eleanor had been transparent about the nature of their arrangement: companionship, not love or wealth. It was Ethan who had assumed he'd benefit financially. The weight of that realization left him hollow, though his pride kept him from admitting it to her. Eleanor, meanwhile, observed Ethan's behavior with quiet patience. She had her suspicions about what was troubling him, but chose not to address it directly. Late one night, she sat in the study, staring at the same stack of papers Ethan had found. A faint smile tugged at her lips. "Let's see what you're truly made of, Ethan," she murmured. As the days stretched into a week, the tension between them grew. Ethan felt trapped, unsure of how to confront the situation. Eleanor's calm and composed demeanor only deepened his frustration. One evening, Ethan sat alone on the back patio, gazing out at the sprawling garden. Eleanor's words from their earlier conversations echoed in his mind. "Life has a way of teaching us what truly matters." Ethan frowned, his anger giving way to uncertainty. What if Eleanor's decision to donate her fortune wasn't a betrayal but a lesson? What if she was testing him, waiting to see if he could rise above his greed? The thought left him conflicted. For the first time, Ethan began to question not just his motives but the kind of man he wanted to be. The mansion, once a place of quiet rhythm, now felt heavy with unspoken tension. Ethan found himself avoiding Eleanor more, retreating to his room or wandering the garden in an attempt to clear his head. But no matter how far he went, his thoughts always led back to her words and the weight of the choices he had made. Ethan's thoughts repeatedly circled back to Eleanor. Her calm presence, sharp wit, and quiet strength. These qualities had begun to overshadow the motivations that had driven him into this marriage. One evening, Eleanor announced that dinner would be served in the formal dining room, a rare occurrence in their household. Ethan suspected it was no ordinary meal. When he arrived, the table was elegantly set with fine china, and soft candlelight flickered across the room. Eleanor, seated at the head of the table, gestured for him to sit across from her, a faint smile on her lips. "Ethan," she began, her tone measured as they started eating, "you've been unusually quiet these past few days. Is something on your mind?" Ethan hesitated, his fork hovering above his plate. "No," he said, his voice uncertain. "I've just been thinking." Eleanor's gaze sharpened. "Thinking about what?" Setting his fork down, Ethan avoided her eyes. "About us. About this whole arrangement." Eleanor leaned back slightly, folding her hands in her lap. "Do you regret marrying me?" The question cut through the carefully maintained civility between them. Ethan's chest tightened under the weight of her words. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice low. "I guess I thought it would be different." "Different how?" Eleanor pressed, her voice calm yet insistent. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I thought I'd have it all figured out by now. The money, the security. I thought it would make everything better, but it hasn't." Eleanor tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "And why do you think that is?" Ethan hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because I didn't understand what I was getting into. I didn't understand you." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on." Taking a deep breath, Ethan's heart pounded as he spoke. "When I married you, it was about the money. That's all I cared about. I thought if I could just secure my future, nothing else would matter. But then, I got to know you, really know you, and now I feel ashamed." Eleanor's eyes softened, though her composure remained steady. "Ashamed of what?" "Of how I judged you," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "Of how I assumed you were just some rich woman looking for company to pass the time. But you're so much more than that. You're smart, kind, and you've lived a life I can't even begin to imagine." For the first time, Eleanor's calm exterior seemed to waver. She studied him carefully, her eyes searching his face for sincerity. "Do you mean that?" she asked quietly. Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "Yes, I do." Setting her fork down, Eleanor's lips curved into a faint smile. "Thank you, Ethan. That means more to me than you know." He looked at her, his brow furrowed. "Why did you choose me, Eleanor? Out of all the people you could have married, why me?" Eleanor leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on the table. "Because you reminded me of myself, ambitious, restless, hungry for something more. But unlike many in your position, you have potential. You just don't know how to harness it yet." Ethan stared at her, her words sinking in. "And you thought marrying me would help me figure it out?" Eleanor chuckled softly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I saw an opportunity to teach you something about life. Either way, I think we've both learned more than we expected from each other." Ethan couldn't help but smile faintly, admiration growing for her with every word. "You're incredible. You know that?" Eleanor laughed, a genuine, warm sound that filled the room. "I've been called many things, Ethan, but incredible isn't usually one of them." As the evening wore on, their conversation shifted to lighter topics: her travels, his dreams, and the quirks of living in such a massive house. For the first time since their wedding, the tension between them seemed to dissolve, replaced by a newfound sense of connection. When the meal ended, Ethan stood and hesitated before speaking. "Eleanor, I don't know what the future holds for us, but I want to do better. I want to be better, for you and for myself." Eleanor rose from her seat, her gaze steady yet kind. "That's all I've ever wanted for you, Ethan. And for what it's worth, I think you're already on the right path." As they parted ways for the night, Ethan felt a flicker of something he hadn't expected: hope. For the first time, he realized that this unconventional marriage might just be the turning point he had been searching for all along. The next morning, Ethan awoke with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Eleanor's words from the previous evening still lingered in his mind, their truth stirring something deep within him. For too long, he had been chasing an illusion of success. Now, he saw an opportunity to redefine what that meant. Stepping into the sunlit dining room, he found Eleanor already seated, a porcelain cup of tea steaming in her hands. She looked up from her newspaper, her sharp eyes softening when she saw him. "Good morning," she said. "Morning," Ethan replied, sitting across from her. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I was wondering, could I join you today on one of your charity visits?" Eleanor's eyebrows lifted slightly, though she gave no sign of surprise. "Are you sure? It's not exactly glamorous work." Ethan nodded, his voice steady. "I'm sure. I want to see what you do and why you do it." Eleanor regarded him carefully for a moment before giving a slight smile. Eleanor studied Ethan thoughtfully before nodding. "Very well. We'll leave after breakfast." By mid-morning, they arrived at a community center Eleanor had funded years ago. The building was modest but well-maintained, bustling with volunteers and families seeking support. Eleanor introduced Ethan to the staff, who greeted her warmly, their respect and admiration for her evident. It was clear she wasn't just a benefactor. She was a cornerstone of their mission. "Come," Eleanor said, handing Ethan a pair of gloves. "Let's see if you're as skilled with a paintbrush as you are with a wrench." Ethan spent the next few hours repainting one of the classrooms, his shirt speckled with white paint by the time they finished. As they worked, Eleanor moved through the center effortlessly, offering quiet encouragement and chatting with volunteers. For the first time, Ethan saw her not as a wealthy widow but as a force of change, a woman using her resources to make a tangible impact. Over the next few weeks, Ethan accompanied Eleanor on more visits. He served meals at a shelter, repaired furniture for a struggling family, and even spoke to a group of teenagers about finding purpose. The work was exhausting yet fulfilling. For the first time, Ethan felt he was part of something bigger than himself. Back at the mansion, Ethan began noticing small things in need of attention. Squeaky hinges, leaky faucets, and jammed drawers. Rather than calling a contractor, he decided to tackle the issues himself. One afternoon, Eleanor walked into the kitchen to find Ethan crouched under the sink, his toolbox beside him. "What are you doing?" she asked, amused. "Fixing the leak," Ethan replied, grinning as he wiped his hands on a rag. "It's what I do, remember?" Eleanor chuckled softly. "I could have called someone to handle that. And let them charge you a fortune?" "No way," Ethan said, shaking his head. "Besides, I like fixing things. It's satisfying." Eleanor smiled, her expression unusually warm. "Very well. Carry on, then." Slowly but surely, the once cold mansion began to feel alive. Ethan's presence brought an unexpected energy to the space. He hummed as he worked, cracked jokes with the staff, and even convinced Eleanor to join him in the kitchen to bake simple yet delicious treats. One evening, as they sat in the library, Eleanor glanced up from her book to see Ethan tinkering with the fireplace. "Ethan," she said softly. He turned, his hands smudged with soot. "Yeah, I've noticed you've changed," she said, setting her book down. "In a good way or a bad way?" Ethan asked, leaning against the mantel. Eleanor smiled faintly. "In a good way. You seem at peace." Ethan nodded slowly. "I guess I am. For the first time, I feel like I'm actually contributing to something real, something that matters." Eleanor's eyes softened, but she didn't reply. Instead, she picked up her book, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan's transformation became undeniable. He was no longer the man who had entered the marriage seeking wealth. Instead, he had discovered a sense of purpose, becoming someone capable of meaningful change. Eleanor, ever observant, watched his journey with quiet pride. Though she never said it outright, her faith in Ethan had been rewarded. He was becoming the man she had always believed he could be. Someone capable of not only changing his own life, but also impacting the lives of others. The mansion came alive with activity on the night of Eleanor's long-awaited charity gala. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting a warm glow over elegantly dressed guests. The event had drawn the city's most influential philanthropists and community leaders. Ethan stood near the entrance, adjusting his tie nervously. The room was filled with people whose lives seemed worlds away from his own humble beginnings. He had helped Eleanor plan the gala but hadn't expected her to ask him to play such a significant role. "Ethan," Eleanor's calm voice brought him back to the present. She approached with her usual grace, her silver gown shimmering softly. "Are you ready?" He swallowed hard, his palms damp. "Not really. I'm not much of a public speaker." Eleanor placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You'll do fine. Just speak from the heart. That's all anyone wants to hear." As the guests settled into their seats, Eleanor took the stage with her characteristic poise, weaving a narrative of gratitude and hope for the future. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he stepped forward, his nerves nearly overwhelming him. But as he looked out over the crowd, his mind returned to the moments he had shared with Eleanor. The lessons, the challenges, the transformation. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak, his voice steady and heartfelt. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice shaky but gaining strength with each word. "When Eleanor asked me to speak tonight, my first thought was, why me? I'm not a businessman or a philanthropist. I'm just a handyman who got lucky." A ripple of laughter eased the tension in the room, and Ethan took a deep breath. "The truth is, when I first met Eleanor, I was lost. I thought money was the answer to everything. I thought if I could just escape my old life, everything would fall into place. So when Eleanor proposed our arrangement, I jumped at the chance, not because I understood it, but because I saw an opportunity to get ahead. The room grew silent, the weight of his confession settling over the audience. But I was wrong, Ethan continued, his voice thick with emotion, because what Eleanor gave me wasn't just a way out. It was a way forward. She showed me what it means to care about something bigger than yourself, to use what you have to make a difference in the lives of others. He paused, his eyes scanning the room. I'm not proud of the reasons I said yes to this marriage, but I'm proud of what it's become. And I'm proud to stand here tonight, knowing that Eleanor has taught me not only the value of giving but the value of living with purpose. A wave of applause erupted as Ethan stepped back from the podium, his chest heaving with relief. Turning to Eleanor, he saw her smiling, her eyes shimmering with pride. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of handshakes and conversations. Guests approached Ethan with words of encouragement and curiosity about his story. For the first time, he felt he belonged, not because of wealth or status, but because he had found his purpose. Later that night, after the last of the guests had departed, Ethan found Eleanor sitting in the library, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked up as he entered, motioning for him to join her. "You did well tonight," she said warmly. "Thanks," Ethan replied, sitting across from her. "But I think you planned this all along, didn't you?" Eleanor's smile widened. "Perhaps, but I wanted you to see for yourself what you're capable of." She reached into a drawer, pulling out an envelope and sliding it across the table. "What's this?" Ethan asked, picking it up. "Open it," Eleanor said simply. Ethan unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning the words. His breath caught. It was a legal document transferring a portion of Eleanor's estate to him, not as an inheritance, but as a trust for the charitable work they had been doing together. "I'm entrusting you with this," Eleanor said, her voice steady, "because I believe in you, Ethan. I believe you have the heart and determination to continue what we've started. But there's one condition. You must promise to use it for good." Ethan's hands trembled as he set the letter down, his eyes brimming with tears. "Why are you doing this for me?" "Because I've watched you grow," Eleanor said, her gaze unwavering. "You've become someone who understands the value of giving, someone who can inspire others to do the same. That's worth more to me than any amount of money." Ethan lowered his head, wiping at his eyes. "I don't know if I deserve this." Eleanor reached across the table, placing a hand over his. "You do, and I have no doubt you'll prove it to yourself in time." That night, Ethan sat alone in his room, the letter still in his hands. Gratitude and resolve swirled within him. Eleanor's faith had given him not just a second chance, but a purpose, a life that truly mattered. For the first time, Ethan allowed himself to believe he was capable of more than he'd ever imagined. He silently vowed to honor Eleanor's trust, no matter the challenges ahead. The years following Eleanor's gala marked a profound transformation, not just for Ethan, but for countless others. With her guidance and eventual passing, Ethan took the reins of the Eleanor Kingsley Foundation. The organization became a beacon of hope, funding community centers, shelters, education programs, and disaster relief efforts. One sunny afternoon, Ethan walked through the bustling headquarters of the foundation. Once an empty building, it now thrived with volunteers and staff moving purposefully, their dedication evident. Ethan greeted them as he passed, exchanging smiles and brief conversations. In his office, a large portrait of Eleanor hung on the wall. Her serene expression served as a constant reminder of the woman who had changed his life. During moments of doubt, Ethan often looked to it, finding strength in the legacy they had built together. Ethan lingered in his office, the soft glow of the desk lamp illuminating the papers spread across his desk. Reports of new projects and letters from beneficiaries filled the space, each one a testament to the foundation's impact. Leaning back in his chair, he gazed at Eleanor's portrait hanging on the wall. "You'd laugh if you saw me now," he said aloud, a wry smile tugging at his lips. A guy who didn't even know what philanthropy meant running one of the largest charities in the city. The smile faded, replaced by a look of deep gratitude. "But you knew, didn't you?" Ethan stood and walked to the portrait, placing a hand on the frame. His voice softened, thick with emotion. "You saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. Thank you, Eleanor, for everything. For not giving up on me when I didn't deserve it. For teaching me that life isn't about what you take, but what you give." The next morning, Ethan attended the opening of a new community center funded by the foundation. Dedicated to Eleanor's memory, the center buzzed with life. Children playing, parents chatting, and staff preparing for the day's programs. As Ethan cut the ribbon, a round of applause erupted. Pride swelled in his chest. Not for himself, but for the legacy he was continuing. A small boy approached him, holding a crayon drawing of the center with the words, "Thank you," scrawled across the top. "For me?" Ethan asked, kneeling to the child's level. The boy nodded shyly. "Thank you for building this place," the boy said softly. Ethan's throat tightened as he accepted the drawing. "No, thank you," he replied. "You're the reason we do this." That night, back in his office, Ethan placed the crayon drawing next to Eleanor's portrait. The room was still, the world outside slowing to a quiet hum. But inside, Ethan felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He sat down, folding his hands in front of him, and gazed at the portrait. "You taught me that wealth is just a tool," he said softly. "It's how we use it that defines us. And because of you, I finally understand what it means to live a life that matters." As the city lights twinkled outside the window, Ethan leaned back in his chair, the weight of his journey settling comfortably on his shoulders. Eleanor had given him more than a chance. She had given him a purpose. With every project completed, every life touched, and every act of kindness, Ethan carried Eleanor's legacy forward. Her vision of compassion and generosity became a guiding light, ensuring that her impact would endure for generations. The crayon drawing and Eleanor's portrait stood side by side, a symbol of the past, present, and future. Together, they served as a reminder that even the most unlikely beginnings can lead to lives of profound meaning. Standing before Eleanor's portrait, Ethan, a man transformed by wisdom, purpose, and love, embodied her belief in second chances and the power of giving back. This story reminds us of the beauty in unexpected opportunities and the transformative power of faith in another person. Eleanor's belief in Ethan didn't just change his life. It sparked a legacy of kindness that would ripple through generations. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it with someone who might need a little inspiration today. For more soul-stirring stories, subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time with another tale celebrating the beauty of the human spirit. And now, goodbye and see you in the next stories.